Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Korea Defense Veterans Association's webinar on Command Post Exercises, or CPXs, in Korea. I am Colonel Retired Steve Lee, the Senior Vice President of KDVA. Our moderator is Lieutenant General Retired Bernard Champeau. After I go over the administrative information, he will introduce our featured speaker, Lieutenant General Retired David Valcourt. Then they will have a discussion about CPXs and then open the floor for Q&A with our audience members. You can submit questions at any time using the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. You can do this even before the Q&A session starts. Please keep the questions relevant to our discussion and short. This webinar will be available on the kdva.vet digital library and the KDVA YouTube channel later today. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce our moderator. Lieutenant General Retired Bernard Champeau commanded 8th Army in Korea from 2013 to 2016. He is now the Senior Executive Vice President of Hanwha Defense International, the biggest South Korean defense contractor, and they are located in the Washington, D.C. area. We are especially thankful to Hanwha for its long-term sponsorship and contributions to KDVA. General Champeau also volunteers as a KDVA board member. But he is most proud of being the son of a World War II, Korean War, and Vietnam War veteran. When you consider the decades that his family and he have supported the ROK-US Alliance, it is no stretch to say that few people are as dedicated to the shared partnership between South Korea and the United States. We are very thankful for General Champeau and his family. So, ladies and gentlemen, General Champeau, our moderator.
Steve, thank you for that very kind introduction. Good day, everyone. We appreciate all of you for joining us from around the globe in South Korea, Europe, and the United States. I'd also like to thank our lean and talented KDVA team for organizing this webinar. As Steve said, this webinar focuses on the importance of the command post exercises in Korea. These are computer-driven exercises based on different scenarios that the Combined Forces Command could face and would need to train for. They train the commanders and staffs of the Combined Forces Command, U.S. Forces Korea, Republic of Korea Joint Chiefs of Staff, United Nations Command, and both U.S. and Korean subordinate units. These exercises are essential to ensure readiness and to deter North Korea. Our webinar today will give you an insider's look at these exercises from the best expert out there, Lieutenant General Dave Valcourt. He has been the senior mentor for CPXs in Korea for many years. Many team with the late General Hondo Campbell, another great leader, coach, and mentor. God rest his soul. General Valcourt's first exercise in 2011 was General Skip Sharp's last CPX, and his final CPX in 2017 was General Vince Brooks' very first exercise. So they're interesting bookends indeed, since General Brooks will take over as the KDVA chairman and president from General Sharp this October 2020. I was fortunate to work with General Valcourt on 8 exercises when I was at UNC, CFC, USFK operations chief and chief of staff and 8th Army commander. General Valcourt was 8th Army commander from 2016 to 2006 to 2008. He also served as the Deputy Commanding General and Chief of Staff of the United States Army Europe, 2005 to 2006, and retired in 2010 after serving as the Deputy Commanding General and Chief of Staff of the United States Army Training Document Command in Fort Monroe, Virginia. In post-military retirement, General Valcourt serves as on the boards of both the Field Artillery Association and the Korean Defense Veterans Association. He is also a senior mentor with the Mission Command Training Program at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And most people in Korea remember him as the exercise czar, who helped build the CFC teams and help protect South Korea. I'm really honored to be here with my Sonbeinim, because no one knows CPXs in Korea better than General Valcourt. So, sir, let's just start by me asking you, how did you become the senior mentor for exercises and why?
Well, thanks, Bernie. And first of all, thanks for that warm introduction. I'm sure my mom, if she was seeing it, would be very proud. And I would also like to give my best wishes to everyone who's on the net and watching this discussion, listening to the discussion this morning, those here in the States, as well as those this evening in Korea. Steve, again, your leadership as the Senior Vice President is deeply appreciated. The KDVA bod did meet this week and recognized, of course, General Skip Sharp. And I know he's on the net, and I have to share with everyone, that first exercise, I never thought I was going to get that first deck of slides past General Sharp, but I did. And of course, General Brooks as my last exercise. And I'd also add in there that General Jung, who's the Vice Chairman of KDVA, was in fact the ROC Chairman during that very first exercise. So Bernie, you asked me, how and why. I used to, when someone was approaching retirement, they'd come up and ask me if I had any wisdom for them, and my answer was always the same, very straightforward. Number one, don't rush to failure, meaning you need to take some time and think about, you've been on a very fast train, you need to stop and think about what you're doing. And the second thing is, whatever you do decide to do, it needs to scratch your itch. In other words, it needs to feed your passion, and you better be happy who you see in the morning mirror. And so following those two rules, I decided to try to find a way to continue to be a soldier, and they say a soldier for life. And so I volunteered to be a senior mentor. And unlike the program that I'm currently in with the Mission Command Training Program at Leavenworth, this was specifically just for Korea, and I work for U.S. Forces Korea J37. Because again, as a senior mentor, you need to be value added and not just looking for something to do. So it was a 5-year appointment, appointed by the Secretary of the Army, and with a 1-year extension. And so that's how that all came about. The reason I decided to go to Korea, again, you need to be relevant. I had 3 tours there, and I always found my experiences in Korea were positive. I used to have this saying, there's 3 things you can do: work out, or maybe get yourself in a little mischief. I always left Korea in the best shape of my life, because you worked hard and you worked out, didn't get in trouble. And finally, I just say I always have had a warm heart for the rest of our science and for ROC friends. Thanks, Bernie.
Yeah, it's it's a tremendous way to give back and to help grow generations of leaders, both Korean and U.S. Actually sending state leaders too. So thank you for that. For those that may not know, what is the purpose of these exercises? What organizations are involved in the exercises? How about shedding a little light on that?
Thanks, Bernie. Well, first of all, I think everyone that's worn the cloth knows that all professional militaries continuously train 24/7, 365 a year in order to build trust, maintain a proficiency, and readiness to fight tonight. If you fast forward now and put it in the context of Korea, the GISMA, the Greater Seoul Metropolitan Area / Seoul, you're looking at a city that's like New York City on steroids. The density of the population. It is so vulnerable, however, because it's only about 35 or 40 miles south of DMZ. And unfortunately, it continues to grow, and it's getting closer and closer to tactical harm's way. I'd often joke that we're almost inside of mortar range in terms of the North Koreans. And from the other side of the fence, he doesn't have to be that good. I mean, he's got his artillery pushed forward. It's old, it's rusty, but let's face it, as big and vulnerable as the target of Seoul is, all he has to do is basically point him in a cardinal direction of south and pull the lanyard, and he will do a great deal of damage. So we find ourselves doing these exercises, these command post exercises, twice a year, and generally they coincide with a personnel turnover for both the Republic of Korea and U.S. forces. So Key Resolve Full Eagle, the spring exercise would coincide primarily with the Korean turnover, and the one in the summer would be correspondent to where we would send earlier, particularly the Command and General Staff College classes. So when you get these new people in, and again, these are commanders and staff, they're coming in as individual replacements. They're there for a year or two, and they're not on a rotational basis like the larger units that we're currently seeing in Korea. So they've got to get on the ground and get their nose in the upland, the standard operating procedures, and team build. That's about 45 to 50% of the population every single year. Great Command Sergeant Major Barry Wheeler used to say, if you hadn't said it in a week, you hadn't said it. The other thing that you have to do is get your boots on the ground, get your eyes on the ground, because you can't appreciate the difficulty of the terrain in Korea from a computer screen. You got to pull out a map, pull out a paper map and go out and look at the ground and learn the terrain. You asked me who participates, and you said it already, but it's Combined Forces Command, and it's the ROC Joint Chiefs of Staff, and their service components is the primary training audience. But in addition to that, we see United Nations Command, U.S. Forces Korea, the ROC Ministry of Defense, the U.S. Embassy. There are functional United States component commands that support the neutral nation sending states, which you mentioned, the Supervisory Commission, the Neutral Nation Supervisory Commission, Indo-PACOM, and of course there's reinforcing off-pen components that will come in the case of a crisis to augment on-pen forces. And then finally, there's the three-letter agencies. There's a whole bunch of folks. This is really a big deal twice a year. Back to you, Bernie.
Yeah, I was thinking about this in our discussions, getting ready for the webinar, that, you know, we've been doing these joint and combined multi-domain, multi-echelon exercises before it really was vogue. And the exercise is designed, as you just said, to bring in a lot, very effectively and efficiently, bring in a myriad of organizations and activities to work through both, you know, crisis and crisis to conflict. And another really important point is the personal turnover and how these exercises, the time of these exercises really address that readiness issue and to very rapidly get them on board. You know, I think a lot of the uninformed don't realize that these tours in Korea are short. And so you have to very quickly build that team to address the existential threat to the north. There's been a media report in the past year or so that have questioned the need for the exercises. And, you know, without getting into any political considerations, what do you think people don't understand about exercises that you could better inform them?
Thanks, Bernie. Before I answer that, though, let me pile on just a little bit from the previous response. You know, again, in context of where Seoul is, GISMA, the Greater Seoul Metropolitan Area, the nature of the threat, there is no room, there is no time for rehearsals. You got to be ready to fight tonight. And so we train those staffs and those commanders to be able to do just that. And every commander processes information a little bit differently than his predecessor. So there's a period of transition when either the staff member changes or the commander changes, and they've got to get used to each other and understand how each other takes information, processes it, and then makes decisions. Remember, the purpose of the staff is to keep the commander informed and to make subordinate units successful. And when you're in either of those positions, you appreciate a supporting staff that has that attitude. So as we go forward now to, all right, again, the need to train what's misunderstood. We've already talked about the tyranny of personnel turnover, and you're absolutely right. The most efficient, the most time-effective way of doing multi-domain training is what we're saying with our computer-supported CPXs. You can't afford, or either in time or money, to bring everybody onto the peninsula. So I think that the main thing that if someone asks me what do people misunderstand, it's that they think immediately you turn the computers on and you're flying airplanes and dropping bombs and you're in a fight. And that's not the way it is. In fact, the timing of this webinar is perfect because this week the command is going through the thing I'm going to talk about next, which is the crisis management exercise, the CMX. The CMX is not driven by the computer. In fact, the staffs are at their normal workplaces and they're using strategic decision memorandums to basically update them on things that have happened on the peninsula. A North Korean event has occurred. The staff is trying to fight through the fog of war and the friction of trying to get the correct information, what actually happened, the 5 W's, the what, the when, the where, the why, the who, and get that information. You know, what do we have on our hands right now? Is it a provocation by the North Koreans? Is it a limited objective attack? Are we talking about all-out war? Or was this somebody's mistake? Was it an accident? You got to figure that out because the consequences are incredible. UNC, United Nations Command at this phase, is a very, very big player. They own the armistice, they own the DMZ, and most of the time these things, especially if they're provocations or limited text, they're armistice violations. And so we got to jump right on that. I used to always say, and Bernie, you know this, we wore 6 hats sometimes. The hat that I wore the least frequently, that hurt the most when you put it on, was that blue one. When you had to wear the United Nations command hat, things had already gone platinum, and the world was a hurting place. So I always used to say, put that hat on, and it's a sad face, because it hurts. The ROC and U.S. National Command Authorities get involved with this crisis management exercise portion. Again, now you have the tyranny of time, because you're DC centric and all that kind of stuff. What the staff finds, though, is very useful, and I've got to really applaud the staffs now, because they're updating them almost annually, and that's the KSOPs. The KSOPs are Crisis Action Standard Operating Procedures. They're a classified book, but it's a decision aid for the staff and for the commanders. All the smart folks that have gone on before you have thought about what ifs and what might happen, and what are the different levers that you might go after if you try to de-escalate the situation. So the decision aid, the KSOPs, have potential decisions that could be made. What are the authorities? Who has the authorities to make those decisions? And who ultimately is the approval authority? They're not linear. I mean, they are organized by defensive condition, DEFCON, but you're not linear, and you can see some being pulled forward depending on the situation. You know, these decisions we're talking about might include things like mobilization of the Iraq Army. That's a big deal. Talk about an economic impact. Evacuation of non-combatants, and not just Americans, but we've got a whole bunch of allies. That's a big deal. In placing the barrier system, activating the counterfire task force. Again, I mentioned earlier the unfortunate position of the ROC capital in regard to the North Korean artillery. Again, there's not a lot of time for these fights. That's the first fight, that counterfire fight, and you better win it. So we find ourselves in this part of the exercise trying to leverage every element we can of national power, and you got to train to execute that. But again, the attitude is we want to de-escalate. We want to return to armistice, and it's not about just putting on, you know, your helmet, your Kevlar, and getting in a large-scale fight. Unfortunately, because we have to train to that possibility, the CMXs generally cascade all the way until we go to the highest defensive condition, and we are a general war. And of course, we then go through in a computer-assisted Part A and Part B to actually, and again, this is to train the staffs and the commanders on what our plans are, and be capable and cognizant of being able to, you know, deviate from them as conditions dictate. So I think that's what I would share with everyone at this point, Bernie.
Yeah, that's excellent insight. I want to talk a little bit about exercise design and the exercise director in the next question. But you know, one point I want to highlight is the investment both U.S. and Koreans have made in these simulation centers. Both of them are brand new. Within 5 years, they're state of the art, and they allow the exercise to reach literally stations globally. Oftentimes, sim centers out of Washington State and Hawaii and Fort Lee, Virginia, to add context and texture to the exercise. So it's a tremendous capability and a huge and important investment that both countries and both militaries have made in their simulation centers. So a lot of what you just talked about was getting to exercise objectives. And you know, I both know a lot of work goes into the exercise design, and throughout the exercise, you as a senior mentor have a running dialogue with the exercise director on gauging, meeting training performance objectives, and the exercise, because the computers are allowed to, the exercise director, although he's involved in training, is allowed to modulate that. So as a person that has overseen many exercises and helped move them toward meeting these exercise objectives, what are some of the insights into how the senior leaders looked at situations and worked to make it a decision? And if you could, since I watched you and General Campbell, before the exercise start, work with both the ROC chairman and the USFK commander on building the exercise design to meet those training objectives. If you would please share your insight in that.
Okay, thanks, Bernie. Again, and the advantage of the computer exercise is that, and I'd always tell my soldiers that, hey guys, we're here to train, and when this training is over, we're going to be stronger. But you know, the fact is, doesn't matter how good our unit is. That guy on the computer has an infinite rheostat of friction and difficulty, and we're going to muscle failure. So we're going to go to muscle failure, and don't be ashamed or disappointed when it happens, but know that we will be stronger and more ready when we're done with this. One of my favorite parts of the exercise was the ability to sit next to these 4-star commanders, the CSC, USFK, UNC commander, and have that chat in the morning as we would update him. Generally, that was about 06 in the morning, and we would go over the previous night's activities, what happened, where we are in the exercise, what's going well, what's not going well. And we would make the appropriate tweaks or adjustments in order to tease out the training objectives that commander wanted to have that day. In attendance with that meeting also was his deputy commander, the ROC 4-star. So you found a very special relationship, from an insider's perspective, very special relationship between the CFC commander and his ROC deputy commander. And that's a very important relationship. The other relationship, perhaps even more important, was that with his counterpart, which was the ROC chairman, the ROC JCS chairman. And the ROC deputy CFC commander was a good go-between that would make sure the two of them were always linked. But there was generally a daily phone call. They would frequently have lunch together. And what I'm trying to transmit here is personal relationships matter. And they matter big time in a combined environment like this. And I was always very pleased to see the close relationships and how these men worked through really, truly difficult problems. And I'll talk about one of those a little bit later. They also used their components. So when I say their components, the CFC commander, once he was activated, he would rely heavily on his Army component, his Air Force component, Navy, Marine. And he would always encourage component to component commander dialogue. And generally he had 2 meetings in the day. The first meeting was primarily the staff focused. As mentor, we would always try to make sure that the staff didn't see that as an opportunity to stop the fight and just brief the commander. But ideally they're tracking the same things they're going to brief him, and so they don't lose a step in the fight. They don't lose the fight at all. They continue the exercise. It's brevity. It's telling the commander what he needs to hear in a form that is meaningful to him. In a combined environment, when you have a language barrier, you learn to make slides that are that use pictures and tell a story, as opposed to having to use a lot of words and do simultaneous or sequential translation. That's time, and you don't have that. And the other good technique was we saw flip-flopping. So one day the U.S. side would do that brief, and the next day the ROC side would do it. So it went back and forth. The briefing that normally occurred in the end of the day was with the commander and his components, and it was minimal staff, maximize components, making their assessments of where they were in the fight. And again, we would give the commander point vision. So he really knew, what the force ratios were, where units were. He knew where the problems. And it was interesting to see how some of them, when the staff would tell him one thing, like, sir, we're at 90%, and he knows that they're down to 67%. And how do you tease that to get the staff to dig a little deeper and find ground truth? That was a particularly vulnerable area with battle damage assessment, when we think we did more damage to the enemy than we really did. Another very useful technique was the battlefield circulation. And what I mean by that is the commander would leave the main command post when we were at the command post Tango, and he would go out to the components and continue he would visit them and continue to monitor the fight from their positions. Again, face-to-face, building trust, building relationships. But the more subtle opportunity here was his deputy ROC commander, and especially when he did the circulation, when he knew there was going to be a pretty significant event happening, he gave the deputy commanders at echelon the opportunity to grab the steering wheel and make decisions. And he would support those decisions, and that was always very effective. So and again, that's training your battle buddy to be able to take over the fight. And I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later. But Bernie, I think if that's not answered, if that didn't cover your question, please feel free.
No,
to
that was outstanding. Of course, it shocks me to discover that staffs didn't have complete command of the facts and perfect situational awareness all of the time.
Certainly when you were the secretary.
We're gonna take questions later. I've got a couple more, but just received a question from another mentor of ours and former USFK, CFC, and UNC commander, General John Tillelli. So I want to combine it with a question I had. And his question was, please address the complexities of combined warfare with multinational forces. And I want you to add that to, and without getting into any classified areas, could you tell us some of the most challenging problems CFC and other commands like UNC faced, and your observation on how they resolved them?
It's a real easy question, of course. And I thank you, General Tillelli, and yourself for that is not a softball. That's a fastball high and tight. But I mean, things that come to mind, TPI, third party intervention. And I would always say that it's not something you can ever prevent. At best, you shape it, but sometimes our ROC ally would think you could prevent it and wish it away. The thing that strikes me the most, though, was, again, the UNC commander, you know, he owns the armistice, he owns the DMZ. Back in the day, he had a brigade-sized formation that basically assisted. It was a combined formation, ROC and US, and they basically patrolled 160 miles by roughly 2.5 mile wide DMZ. And so they could keep pretty good eyes on the situational awareness of what was going on there. Fast forward to now we've got about 50 soldiers, 50 US soldiers there. And so the UNC's commander's personal eyes to know what's going on inside of the DMZ and get awareness of an event when it happens. He gets it from ROC JCS, of course, who has ROC units manning the entire DMZ. So in 2010, we had the sinking of the Chonam. We had shelling of Waipido that November. We had the box mines, you know, in 2015. We had a series of things that were happening by the north. And frankly, the Korean domestic population, my sensing, was not satisfied with the firmness of the response by their military to basically break the cycle of provocations. And so, you know, the ROCs also have senior mentors, and we developed a relationship. And we had to work very hard when there was an event that occurred to work with our allies so that we certainly always recognize the opportunity and the requirement for self-defense. But there's a point where self-defense ends and punishment, or get even, or show how strong we are, begins. And that was very delicate because we're talking about, you know, nationalism and sovereignty. And it was our soldier that was hurt, our two NCOs that had limbs blown off. And so you get into this proportionality thing, and is the threat still there? The senior mentors worked that. The CFC commander and the ROC JCS chairman worked that piece. And we were able to understand and come up with a procedure, bilateral operational planning teams when we had an event, so that we can understand both sides of the equation and come to a solution that was meaningful for both of our countries and acceptable. So, and again, if I didn't answer General Tillelli's question or yours, but that was the example, that particular one of the 6 years I did the exercise business with CFC. We didn't solve that in the first meeting. That took several reattempts to try to break through and get through all of the, you know, the emotionalism that was involved in that situation, and work something out with our ally. Because clearly, it wasn't about the North Koreans trying to hurt two soldiers. It was about the North Koreans trying to push a wedge in the alliance and get us to argue with each other, because ultimately that's what he wants more than anything else, is to cause a fissure in the alliance. Over.
Yeah, really good insight. And you know, the whole box mine incident and the proximity to the exercise following your comments on that are right on. And you know, everyone was kind of manning their battle stations at that time, and so you know, General Scaparrotti would tell you that the exercise became real world, and you know, we continued with the exercise, but we also had the additional, you know, kind of fog and and friction of that event that really gave us additional training opportunities.
Hey, Ernie, let me just jump in. You're talking about tension. You're exactly right. And frankly, during that exercise, I always had my passport in my pocket, and I had some Korean money because you didn't know what was going to happen.
Yeah. This is the last question. I'm going to combine it with a question I got from, and then we're going to go to other questions from the audience. But I'm going to combine it with a question I received from Brigadier General William King, who, as you know, participated in many exercises as the 8th Army G3, and then in his subsequent jobs. His question is, part of the effect of the combined exercise in Korea is strategic messaging to North Korea. Has that aspect become too politicized and now used to message the ROK, the US, and North Korea as a result, has somewhat overcome the primary purpose of conducting combined and unilateral exercises in Korea? And so the question I had in that kind of context is, what is your opinion on why North Korea objects to these exercises?
Well, thanks, Bernie. Thanks for the question. And I think it goes back to, like we mentioned earlier, one of the participants was the neutral nation sending states. And, as an artilleryman, I used to say, we can't talk to the infantry center, the armor center about how important their artillery is. It has to come from division commanders. So who's speaking makes a difference. And the fact that we have sending states, 18 sending states, and oh, by the way, the alliance, the ROK-US alliance, ROK-US CFC, remember, it's a combined organization. It's sometimes perceived as a US organization. It's the ROK-US Combined Forces Command. We need that international legitimacy. It just can't be us saying giving our opinion, and I think it doesn't have the credibility sometimes, and it doesn't have the bounce of having our international partners. And I think that's the part that really bothers Kim Jong-un the most. The fact that he wants, again, to, if he can eliminate it down to ROK and North Korea and potentially US, and some help, perhaps his help from China, he'll certainly do that. But as long as he knows that the international partners are in support of the ROK-US alliance, and you have reception staging and onward integration, RSOI potential, he knows he can't win. He can do a lot of damage in Seoul, but he will never get down to Busan because we've got off-pen forces coming in, and it's because of that solidarity in the alliance and the international legitimacy. And messaging is an extremely important part of that.
Yeah, I agree. And there's been a lot of discussion, debate about the exercises and the impact. And I think from a military perspective, you've addressed that well. So thank you for that, sir. I'm going to go to some other questions. We'll now transition into the audience Q&A. I have a very direct question from a friend of ours, General Chunenbum, Lieutenant General retired. And his question is, from your observations, do you believe the Koreans are capable of executing wartime operational control?
Chunenbum, I wish you'd ask me an easier question. But it's really funny because I was the 8th Army commander in 2006. And not to get into politics, but again, our presidents, our national command authorities, there was pretty high tension about having the foreigner living in our capital. And of course, the 8th Army at that time was a service component. It wasn't a field army. But I remember having the opportunity to, and I think it was called Muginwa, which was a all service kind of a mentoring program that the ROK JCS did, and I went down there, and it was a tour. I did it 6 times, and I used a metaphor as I explained to our ROC partners what this OPCON transfer was all about. And I said, you know, it's like this. For 60 plus years, we've been driving down a highway, and the name of the highway is Defense of the Peninsula and Maintaining the Armistice. That's the name of the highway. And we both happen to be traveling in the same car. And for 60 plus years, the US side has had the steering wheel, and our ROC partner, our battle buddy, has been in the right side. Okay, so our leaders have said, we're gonna go after this thing called OPCON transfer. And so we're gonna switch positions in the same car. So as the passenger in the car now, my skin is in the game, and it's very important to me that you have all the driving skills necessary to safely and continuously maintain our vehicle along this highway to maintain the alliance and defend the peninsula. I used to tell them, you could get worried if I mentioned to you, okay, I'm gonna let you go in your car and I'm gonna follow in my car behind you. That's an entirely different kettle of fish. So it is about the both of us going step by step. And again, that's, I think, why we encourage our deputies. If you look at the Combined Forces Command, ROC US Combined Forces Command, at each principal staff level, there's a ROC and a US officer. They both get the opportunities to, if you will, grab the steering wheel. We have a combined division now in Combined Forces Command. So we're using every opportunity we can. We still have some work to do in terms of the interoperability of some of our, especially our command information machines, KGIX and Centrix K, so that we can pass information transparently back and forth to one another. And, but I think it certainly is possible. I think we have a vested interest. Korea and our alliance, in my own personal opinion, is one of the few places our country has made a deal and stuck to it, and is the shining example of what a bilateral alliance is all about.
Yeah, thanks. So I would just add that, you know, the exercises, since the transition is conditions-based, the exercises are the perfect vehicle to see if there's resident capability and the conditions for this transition are met. It's one way to exercise that. I've got another on
one other question. I mean, again, not to get into the specifics, but back to Chun and Bun's question. And as we all know, that whole transfer was going to be conditions based, and the command post, the computer assisted command post exercises certainly played part in that. And you know, and some of that is on our ROC ally acquiring certain capabilities, and it's also depending upon whether or not the environment on the peninsula you know, makes sense to do that transition. Again, goes back to the location of the capital, and there's no room for amateurs, and there's no room for rehearsals, and we've got to be ready to fight tonight together.
Yeah, I agree with you. Earlier, you had talked about the CMX phase, and the difference between the CMX and the computer assisted phase. Excuse me. I'd like to go back to that and just get some additional insight on throughout the various exercises and commands, both, and commanders really, both Korean and US. How was that phase best used from your perspective? And again, where it brought in the national command authorities from both countries.
Yeah, great question, Bernie. That was my favorite part of the exercise. I really enjoyed the CMX part because I thought that was the part that had the intellectual calculus. You know, it was the graduate level of understanding all of the potential levers, and not just the military one, but you know, you talk about PROMESI, the political, the military, the informational, the economic, all those possible things that could be brought, because we wanted to go back to armistice, and hopefully that's both of us, not just one of us, but we want to go back to the armistice. And And so we're going to do everything we can for that. The best exercise that I think I saw with that regard was when I have a brain cramp here, but our current ambassador, when he was the PACOM commander.
Admiral Harris.
Thanks, Admiral Harris.
Ambassador Harris.
Ambassador, but then Admiral Harris. I mean, and called PACOM at that time. They were all into our exercise. They were supporting the ROC U.S. Combined Forces Command commander in the exercise. He had the PACOM staff talking to our staff. Absolutely no daylight between PACOM at that point and CFC. It was a thing of beauty. It was probably one of those best exercises that I had seen that brought us together, because there's always a tension, because PACOM, Indo-PACOM owns China, not CFC, not Combined Forces Command. And so having to work through that third party, and if they were distracted, if you will, and had their attention was in another part of the theater, and figured that you could take care of your own business on the peninsula, it made it more difficult. So I thought that was, again, the CMX allowed us to bring in the three-letter agencies, the state, our national command authorities. You did the MCM, the SCM, the security consultative meeting, the military consultative meeting, to work through those issues. And again, a lot of hard work by the staff, and then also the commander imposing his discipline on the formation, so they weren't getting preoccupied with everyday activities. Because remember, I said this was done normally at their armistice workplace, and not at a battle, a fight tonight command post. So sometimes they would get distracted. You wanted to focus on this command, this crisis management exercise.
Yeah, to me that was always one of the most interesting and unpredictable phases of the exercise, the crisis management exercise. Just the complexity of managing the crisis, and as you accurately state, the number of agencies in both governments that are involved in that, and in real time. And we're not trying to bring it to conflict, although that's the next phase of the exercise. We're trying to do just the opposite. And it's always very, very interesting. And it's also a phase of the exercise, I think, where both countries have a tremendous opportunity to learn and to grow from that dialogue, that interaction. So yeah, I always found it fascinating, tough, but fascinating. Let's see if we have time for one more. As a dinosaur, I'm a little challenged with this.
I'll try to keep my response, Bernie.
This will be the last question, and it's really, with your years of experience on how we did these combined exercises, and how they've changed over the decades. That I think you told me earlier, your first exercise was in 1986. Where do you see them in the next 3 to 5 years? I mean, do you have any insight on where you think we'll be in 3 to 5 years with these exercises?
Thanks, Bernie. Well, first of all, as we switched command posts, and of course now the center of gravity for U.S. Forces Korea and U.S. 4-stars at Camp Humphreys and down south, out of Seoul. And so occupying the new facilities and just getting used to that is one thing. I think we emerge, and we've got new Space Command. We've got cyber, of course, has been growing over the years, and it has become more and more customary to play. It's interesting how we take, and we used to do it at the AARs. We would ask a question that would force folks to have to talk about an issue that they would otherwise prefer not to discuss, such as WMD, weapons of mass destruction, third-party intervention, TPI. This one might also include cyber. It could include space. and other levers. So I see that we talked about multi-domain training, and I see that as the domains increase in number and complexity, again, our computer-assisted exercise will allow us to touch on those, and again, help us train that proficiency and that confidence and that trust in each other, so that we're able to take our equipment and our soldiers, our service members, and our civilian leadership, and again, form a tight team, no daylight between us, fully capable, and that the guy up north fully appreciates just how ready we are, and behaves himself up there. So, and I would also, if this is the end, I'd also want to say that to all of our rock friends out there, Gwan Bok Jol, which of course this Saturday, 2 days from now, is Rock Liberation Day, very big day in Korean culture, and just want to wish them a happy Korean Independence Day. Back to you, Steve.
Hey, yeah, sir, I just, closing this out, I just really want to thank you for your time today, for the time it took for you to prepare for this, but most importantly for your decades of service and, you know, your servant's heart that is driving you to continue to make a contribution. And so thank you for all that. You work on the KDVA board, you work as a senior mentor. As I did in all 8 of those sessions, some were more painful than other. I learned some interesting insights this morning, so my sincere thanks. And I'd just like to close by highlighting the fact that these important exercises remind us of the vital work that our service members and veterans have done and continue to do for the Iraq and U.S. alliance. And one of the ways KDVA will continue to advocate for them and their work is by hosting a webinar series focused on the experience and contributions of the Korean defense veterans who took the mantle of the Iraq-U.S. alliance from our Korean War veterans and have been carrying it for 7 decades. KDVA will send some details soon. So thank you all for your interest and your participation and your support. Thank you.